Um, nice to see you all here today, and we've got some fun stuff to do. Let me share my screen. And get this going. Okay, so we're in the Beyond the Basics class, and today we're going to be talking about research, methodology, and key sources. Today we're going to be, hold on just a second, I need to change this. Much better. Okay, now I can see what's actually in the PowerPoint, which is always helpful. Okay, so methodology we're going to be talking about today. Before we get to that, I wanted to talk about some leftovers from last week. If you'll remember, we talked about a newspaper article of a building burning down, but the reporter actually wasn't an eyewitness, wasn't there during the burning. And so would that be a primary source? And the answer was no, that's a secondary source. What I should have mentioned at the time is that it's not a primary source, but it's a pretty strong secondary source, depending on the newspaper. If it's a reputable newspaper, that information is going to be pretty reliable. So as secondary, we have the two categories, but within those categories, there's a whole spectrum of trustworthiness. And I'd have to say that most newspapers on let's say on a non-political, apolitical issue like a building burning down would be very reliable. So I should have said that last week. Also, I just wanted to comment on our discussion about the Matty Yonts death certificate. That's as fine an experience as I've had teaching, with the collaboration that occurred, with everybody giving their ideas and their own viewpoint and their own perspective that they got from different experiences. That's kind of the height of collaboration, and it really shows how wonderful collaboration is and how much more you can understand about genealogy. So I was real happy with last week. I learned a lot. So this week, we're going to talk about methodology. What is methodology? It's how you go about researching genealogy. Maybe the rules that you use, or the guidelines, the strategies that you use. There are many different methodologies. Some of them are very specific, a methodology that you'd use in a certain circumstance. We'll talk about more of those next week, but today we're going to talk about two different general methodologies, and I call them hunter or gatherer. Are you going to be a hunter, or are you going to be a gatherer? Traditional research is hunting. Traditional research is the way that I was trained, the way that any research guide is going to tell you how to research. So let's talk a little bit about okay, here's a hunter. And note that he looks pretty intense, doesn't he? He's focusing, he's intent. Let's say he's looking for a deer or a herd. If a squirrel's chattering behind him, he's not going to be looking at that. He's looking very, very carefully at, the object of his hunt. And so when we talk about a hunter methodology, we're talking about intentional research. We're talking about determining a research objective first. And that would be, for instance, I want to find the parents of William Stell, who's my immigrant ancestor from England. That would be the objective. Then beyond that, I'd want to determine what record is likely to help me accomplish that objective. For instance, one of the things might be William's marriage certificate. That might tell me his parents' names. It might not. Most marriage certificates do not have the names of parents, but if I'm lucky, they do. So you concentrate with the Hunter methodology, you concentrate on one record at a time to accomplish your research objective. You maintain that focus of what record can I look at that will accomplish my objective. You try one, if that doesn't work, you go on and try the next. Gathering within the record is a good idea. So just like our primary and secondary sources, we found those categories were useful in determining trustworthiness. And yet each record that we looked at had some primary and some secondary information. So it's not an either or here. You're going to hunt and you're going to gather. But as a hunter, you would go into one record. Hunting is easier to keep a research log because you're doing one at a time, that ever important research log. So as you log your research, let's say you're looking for that marriage certificate. And so you've gone to a database of marriage records. And let's say it's not indexed. So you're going page by page through. If you pass a STEL that is not William STEL, but it's a STEL certificate, you're going to grab that. You're going to either, download that or make a note, or you are going to record that. And it's going to go into your research log then when you finish looking through that whole database, whether it's a whole record or a part of a record, like a section of a record, but you're going to record, I looked and got all STEL information, and that will tell you that you're done with that as far as STEL research is concerned. So you are gathering, you're gathering all STELs, maintaining the focus that will lead you to your objective. Okay, now here's a gatherer, and look at the difference in body language. She's a little more relaxed. She's kind of, might say, strolling through the field. She's intent. She's still looking for things. She's not just daydreaming, but she's looking at everything as possible things that she might want to gather into her collection. And so this is quite a different methodology. Gathering. This is probably the methodology you're most familiar with, at least through Family Search, if that's what you've been using primarily. So in Family Search, you start on a person's page and then click on a link to search records. And this is what it looks like. I have gone to my William STEL page, and I've clicked on search records on Family Search. And I comes up with, 527 records to look through. Now, if I look at every one, I am gathering. I might want to filter the results. Let's say I filter them to birth records. I'm becoming more of a hunter, aren't I? I'm looking for a more specific record, but I'm still kind of gathering because it will be different kinds of birth records. I can also, on the right-hand side, change the information for William STEL that might give us a different search result. But in the end, this is largely a gathering process. Okay, the difference in approach. You might be thinking, which approach is better? And the answer is yes. I'll share with you my experience. I spent a lot of time going through the hundreds of records that were possible matches and learned nothing new. Certainly nothing that helped me accomplish my goal. And yeah, that was less than satisfying. And to be honest, it felt like a waste of time. Now, why, I asked myself, why did so many other people were having good experiences with this kind of gathering search. Why did this leave me less than excited? I'm thinking, well, maybe you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You know, maybe I learned one way and I'm kind of stuck there and I don't like the new way. And there's probably some truth to that. I don't like it when a website changes their navigation. I like the familiar. I like to be comfortable. However, I think it's more than that. And I think the real reason that I didn't have a good experience is I had already seen most of those records. That is, I had already gathered. I had already picked the field clean and there was nothing left. And so that was frustrating, just to see things that I already knew. So the lesson learned: when to gather and when to hunt. And hopefully this will be helpful to you. Primarily, I think it's helpful to gather at the beginning of your research for the reasons that we've talked about. I don't mean to be negative about gathering at all. It can be exciting. It's rewarding. I just came upon it a little too late and had already done a lot of gathering. It helps to fill out the information on your ancestors and the families. And that's extremely valuable on so many levels. You're putting flesh on the bones. Every new record that you gather is going to give you some new information, some new, maybe a nuance into their life, some insight into their life. And that's, you can't quantify how valuable that is. We also have talked about getting as many sources as possible. The more sources you have, the more solid your pedigree. And so you are buttressing the connections that you've made. And so it's extremely valuable. Okay, we're gonna go into a case study next, but I want to ask if there are any questions so far. You understand what I mean by hunting versus gathering?
There isn't anything in the chat either, just,
Okay, well, good. We will carry on and maybe more questions will arise. We're going to look at a case study that will hopefully illuminate in an interesting way. So my research example is William Stell, an immigrant ancestor of mine. And I was very fortunate. I have 4 grandparents who were all interested in genealogy at some level. And so they all got information from and wrote it down at a minimum. Some of them did a little research even. I already knew when I started that William Stell, my immigrant ancestor, was born about 1824 in England. He married Phoebe Marlin in 1853 in Massachusetts. They have children: Sarah, James William, Benjamin, Phoebe, and Charles. And James William is my great-grandfather. And I knew that they moved at some point to Chicago, Illinois. Okay, so this should be the time to gather. But you know what? I didn't want to gather. I wanted to focus on getting back to England. I wanted to jump the pond. Now, I'd been told that you can't just jump back to country of origin, that you need at least a town of origin. And that in order to get that town of origin, you should research William in the United States. And that will give you the information that you need to jump the pond. But I want to hunt. So I hunt. And I go to Ancestry, to the 1841 England census. I put in William Stell, exact first and last names. I put in a birth of 1824, plus or minus 5. I can't put in any location because I don't know where he was born. And I don't know where he was living in 1841. So that's really all the information that I can put in. Now, at this point, You know, did I get 2 possibilities? Did I get 400? Well, I'm lucky that that Stell is not a very common name. And so I got 10 possibilities. Notice that none of them were born in 1824. But then I remember that the 1841 England census is notorious for rounding to the nearest 5. And so isn't it interesting that that 8 out of the 10 are either on a 5 or a 10 year, 1826 being, that person was rounded to 15, I think. And 1821, that person was rounded to 20. So the birthplaces vary from Middlesex, England, there's Yorkshire, and there's Lancashire. The residents, there's St. Leonard, Shoreditch, or St. Luke in Middlesex. There's Stansfield in Yorkshire, Bolton Percy, Whalley, Keighley, Halifax, and Rochdale, Lancashire. So what does that tell me? Well, it tells me nothing. It tells me I cannot jump back to England yet. So no instant gratification, darn it. So I started gathering. I found William in every available US census. I found birth records for his children. I found William and Phoebe's marriage record. And if you'll remember last week, we looked at this marriage record. And it's a copy of a marriage record. And it told us that William's father was William and his mother was Sarah. Okay, I got this fairly early on. And I thought, okay, great. Now I can go back to that census and figure out which one it is, right? Before that, I got an even bigger find. William Stell's headstone in Omro, Wisconsin, as a part of the gathering, right? You're looking at marriage, you're looking at death and burial records. And this reads, I know you can't read it. It reads, William Stell, born November 14, 1824, in Stansfield, Yorkshire, England. Bingo. Okay, this is an actual photo of me when I saw the headstone. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, this felt pretty good, right? I'm going to be able to hunt. I'm going to be able to gather. So I go back to the 10 and I see the 2 that are from Stansfield and I look at them. And the first one is, a little hard to read, Abraham Stell is presumably the father of William. Now, the 1841 census did not indicate relationships, so you're just inferring from the ages. But Abraham was not William's father, so this is not the correct one. So let's go to the next one. Do that. The next one, James Stell. Okay, where's William Stell? Okay, there's William, age 15, but his father is James and not William. So I'm still stuck. The mother, Sarah, that's looking good, but that contradicts what the marriage record says. Can I say that that's his family? No, I can't. I just can't do that. Darn. Not there quite yet. So what was my conclusion at that point? William's parents never existed. That just, they didn't exist. So there's a brick wall and it's just frustrating. And it stayed that way for many, many years, not being able to prove who William's parents were. Now, keeps doing that. Just to sum up what we've said about hunting and gathering, when to become a hunter. After the gathering, when you've picked the field clean with the gathering, it's time to hunt. And usually that means going to beyond the databases that are on Ancestry and Family Search and finding some less well-known records and databases. And we'll talk about where to find those. Give you some ideas on some of the things to look for. Resources. Okay, so we're going to talk about these. This is by no means an exhaustive list. If I were to write down every database that I could think of, it would take, I mean, a lot longer than class. It would also be out of date tomorrow. It would be because we're getting new every day. So what I'm going to try to teach is how to find the resources as they come. But we're going to start with a really old-fashioned one. And this is something called Red Book. This is my copy. You'll see that it's very old and tattered. I have used it a lot. It's probably, 30 years old. It is a source for American state, county, and town sources. Edited by Alice Eichholz. She's a familiar name in genealogy. Within the Red Book, there is a section on each state in the United States. This is a valuable resource if you're doing United States research. It is something that you ought to consult. It is readily available. I would hope every family history center has one. Certainly your libraries are going to have one. It's going to really help you as you start the gathering process to know what and where to gather. Obviously I bought mine. They are on sale. I mean, you can get them at thrift books for under $5. So if you do a lot of US research, it's probably worth the purchase. If you do purchase one, get the 3rd edition, I would recommend. I mean, any is better than nothing at all, but you can see that this was originally published in 1989, but there's a 1992 and a 2004 edition. I've got the 2004 edition. I think that's the last one, but there may be others. I think that's the last one though. And at least in 2004, there was an internet. So there are some references to places on the internet to look. The URLs are going to be different, probably last 20 years, but they're good starting places. Now, I was going to scan all the Texas pages and run you through those, but then I read below the copyright. No part of this publication may be reproduced in any form without written permission of the publisher.
No. Yes.
So I did not scan those pages. I don't want to break copyright laws. However, so let me give you a description of what you're going to find. In the Texas section, it starts out with an overview of the history, starting with Native Americans that were in Texas. It's got a guide to vital records and census records, where to find them, repositories, compilations of, published compilations of vital records and census records. It's got background sources. If you're going to do a lot of research in Texas, learning the background to the state and the history and different facts about Texas is going to be real helpful. There's a section on maps. It tells you where the general land office is and what is there and how to get a hold of the maps there. There are guides to land, probate, court, tax, cemetery, church, and military records. There's a paragraph for each one of those to tell you where to find those. There's a periodicals and archives section, where to find newspapers and archives. What archives are there and what are in the archives? What records are in the archives? So you can see that it just has a ton of information and a ton of resources that it guides you to. It's got some special focus topics of immigration, naturalization, Native American, Republic of Texas settlers, African American, and Latino. Talks about county resources, what records are available at the county level. And then at the end, and this is at the end of each state, there's a table with an alphabetical listing of the counties. The county address, county court address, which undoubtedly has changed. You know, the zip code might be a little different, might be a completely different building by now. The date the county was formed and the county from which it was carved out, the parent county, the year that birth, marriage, and death records started to be taken on the county level. The year that land, probate, and court records started. So you can see, you could look at this and say, oh, I'm looking at this period of time. I could look and see if there's a probate record, or I can look and see if there's a court record in this county. Okay, so that's the end of Red Book. Really great resource that not a lot of people use anymore, I think, because they don't know about it. Maps, and this is a favorite of mine. I love maps. We've got, and what was it last week that we used Google Maps? That's a great resource for finding out, you know, where a place is, how far apart two towns are. If you want to see how far somebody moved, you know, those are things that won't have changed probably over time. I also like, because so much of the research involves county jurisdictions, it's really great to have a state map with the counties. And I usually use, there are plenty that you can use. I like to use genealogical.com. And what I'll do is I'll Google, you know, Pennsylvania county map, geology, and choose the geology map. And that way I can see where the counties are. I can see what counties are next to each other. This is real helpful in if you found, let's say you found a William Stell in Suffolk, Massachusetts, and a William Stell in Essex, Massachusetts. Are they the same one? And if they are, how do I prove that? And it might be, the geography might be pertinent there. You know, people didn't, sure they moved, but the local moves are more common than moving across the state. And so it helps to know. Sometimes your ancestor can move counties without moving at all because the county boundaries changed. So that's real helpful to know what counties are next door to each other. If the county happens to be a border county bordering another state, then you can go to Wikipedia for that county, and there's usually, I think there's always a place in Wikipedia that tells what the adjacent counties are, even if they're in a different state. The county maps are just going to show the county maps in that state, and they're not going to show what's next door. And so if you want to know all the adjacent counties, Wikipedia is a great source for that. We talked about Sanborn, and somebody recommended Sanborn insurance maps, and we're going to talk about those, and historical maps. Two maps you might not be familiar with. So Sanborn,
Sue,
yeah.
just a few questions real quick.
Yeah.
Do those maps that you're referring to, do they cost at all?
No, they're free online.
And then do you have a preference between a map versus a gazetteer?
Both. And thank you for bringing up Gazetteer, because I thought of that after I did the presentation. Thought I'd really like to mention that, but may not have time to do that. Gazetteers are really, really helpful. They're very different than maps, but they help you to understand different geographic places, the history of towns, and yeah, definitely use both.
Great,
Any other-
thanks. That
any-
was it on the questions.
Great. Okay, so the Sanborn insurance maps were created for insurance companies so that they could assess the danger each building had, for fire. And it shows lots of different things: subdivision names, streets, buildings, addresses, along with building information that you may or may not be interested in, such as the number of doors in a building or the number of windows. How can this help you in your genealogical search? Well, Google Maps only shows how streets now look. And of course, that changes over the years. The Sanborn maps show you how streets looked in a year in the past. So I think we looked up, was it Phil's address, I think, where we saw a house on Google Maps that was still there. And he said that, no, that was his ancestors' building. That doesn't always happen. So to find out addresses in days past, if you're looking in the city directory and you find an address for an ancestor in 1890, you can go and see if there's a Sanborn map for that city in that year. Library of Congress has digitized 25,000 maps, and their goal, and they're going to accomplish that in the near future, is to have 500,000 maps, Sanborn insurance maps. Here's the link to that. If you just Google Sanborn maps, Library of Congress, that'll get you there. So don't worry about that URL. Okay. Now here's an example of a Sanborn map. This is a Sanborn map of Chicago, I believe in 1903. And you can see, you can't see all the details that it gives you, but you can see that the streets are laid out and that the buildings are there and that there are numbers on the building, and you could find an address. As you look at this, imagine a map of Chicago today. Those blank spaces are going to be filled up, aren't they? So Chicago looked a lot different in 1903 than it does today. And this can really help you to figure out more about your ancestor. My favorite of all, however, are historical maps. And this is something that, this is a resource that a lot of people don't know about. And it's really fun. You may have noticed the map that I have behind me, and we're going to look at that. This is a historical map. It's called the Map of Snickersville Turnpike, Virginia. And it happens to be the road that I live on. My address is Snickersville Turnpike. This is a map created by a historian and map maker. His name is Eugene Scheel. He did this in the late 1990s, and it's a treasure. The history, and I'll read this to you. It's a little hard to read. The road was probably an Indian path by the mid-18th century. It became a settler's thoroughfare known as the Mountain and Middle Road, with two major deviations from its present course, via Colchester Road and through Delta and Winfield's farms. In 1810, the General Assembly authorized $20,000 to construct the 15-mile-long Snickers Gap Turnpike. By 1818, the road was complete with tolls taken at Beaver Dam and Goose Creek bridges and at the gate on Blue Ridge. closed due to war in 1861. The turnpike reopened in 1868 and remained a toll road through 1890. Okay, so that is a really fun history of the street that I live on. And what you can't see is that to the west of this, immediately to the west, are the Blue Ridge Mountains. Snicker's Gap was one way that settlers took through the mountains to get to west of Loudoun County. And there's another, the next gap is maybe 50 miles to the south. It's called Ashby's Gap. And those are the two major gaps that settlers used to move west. Okay, here's a close-up of the map, and you can just see how fun it is. There are names, there are dates where people lived there. There are buildings that he's drawn in. I have inserted that pink star because that's where my house is. Above that star, you can see a house, a big house called Mount Edgecombe. A Dr. John Alexander Klein lived there in 1912. Now, I'm not sure about this, but that house is still standing. And I know that during the Civil War, a doctor lived in that house because it became a hospital. And the doctor there would take any soldier that needed help, whether north or south. He helped everybody. And there are still discoveries of buttons from uniforms in this yard. It's very cool. In about 1920, a woman named Dorothy McMichael bought that house and 1,000 acres around it to start a dairy farm. She was from Pittsburgh, and I think her husband stayed in Pittsburgh and she came here to start a dairy farm. And her grandson lives in that house right now. Paul McMichael lives there, and he sold us our property and he built our house. He's a home builder. So this is really, really fun to see. Our house is between Butcher's Branch and the North Fork of Beaver Dam Creek. So we're surrounded on three sides by creek. There is a cemetery, the Grady Powell graveyard. You can see that little cross that's up on the upper right-hand side. And you drive by it every day and you wouldn't see it. It's overgrown. And it's actually on Paul McMichael's property, and I'm going to ask him if we can go in and clean it up at some point. Anyway, this is just so great that it has names there. And this particular one, he's taken names from different time periods. Most of the historical maps that I've seen with names are 1847, say, and these are the people that lived there in 1847. So really, really rich resource. How do you find historical maps? The Google, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg called it. I use the Google a lot. Now, in Family Search, you are on a person page and you can click on search records Google, and that will search for the person. And maybe that brings good results for a percentage. I think it's a small percentage of searches. But I want to talk to you about using Google to search for records. And never, ever be afraid to Google, okay, I wonder if there's a historical map in this town or this place. So historical map, fill in the blank, wherever you want to look, and just see. And if there's not one of the town, see if there's a county one in the county. And you will find all sorts of records out there, all sorts of historical maps. I have found some really great databases of vital records. after searching in Ancestry for Illinois birth records, and in Family Search, and not finding the years that I wanted, I consult Red Book and find, yeah, they really started keeping records some places way before, the early 1900s. So let me Google it. So I Google birth records, Illinois, and find a searchable database of birth records before 1910. And there's some death records in there too. Just don't be afraid to Google what you want to find. Google the Family Search wiki pages. That's another, along with Red Book, start with a wiki page. And what I do is Google Family Search wiki, Cook County, Illinois, or whatever county, or even a town. There might be, it's a city, there might be a wiki page just for that, a Family Search wiki page for that. It can be a topic. So Family Search wiki, African American research. And you'll find a guide to African American research. It's pretty amazing what's out there. And as there's no way I can tell you all that's out there, I'm telling you how to find what's out there beyond Ancestry and beyond Family Search. Okay, newspapers is another thing. I found the historic Colorado newspapers by Googling that. Obituaries is really good. And that's good for names. You can Google a name and put obituary, and you'd be amazed at what you can find without going to a database at all. It'll just take you right to the obituary. Land records, plat maps in counties, city directories. Google it, find out where it is. That's really, really your key to finding internet sources. And then the last find that I have made that has been so valuable to me is historical and genealogical societies. Here's one of the first ones that I discovered, Dutch Fork chapter of the South Carolina Genealogical Society. It is a chapter of the South Carolina Genealogical Society. The Dutch Fork, there's no town called Dutch Fork or county. It's actually Newberry County, but it's the area where German settlers came in the early, before statehood. And if you look across the top, you can see some of the records that they have, Bible records, church records, Dutch Fork families, photographs, publications. There's a lot of information on this website. I clicked on the Auswanderer families, and this is what I find. Early German settlers of South Carolina. And it talks about the history of people leaving Germany and settling in South Carolina, and where they were from and how they arrived and what years they probably, what was the height of the immigration, the church records that are available. And then there's a list of German settlers that they found records for, starting with AAL, Johann Philipp AAL, and then anyway, goes on. There are over 100 names below. You're not going to find this on Ancestry. You're not going to find this anywhere but with the Dutch Fork chapter of the South Carolina Genealogical Society. All of this is free. All of this is available. Now they have other resources that are available for purchase, and if you join their genealogical society, there are other things that you get access to as well. But there's a ton out there that's just for free. Genealogical and historical societies tend to draw people who have some expertise, some interest that has that has driven them to develop an expertise in areas. These people have used their expertise and have used their local resources, the South Carolina archives that they have gone through and looked for records, as well as going back to German church records. And they have done all of this research for the love of it. And it's free. It's free for us to enjoy and to use in our own research. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. So as I said, these genealogical societies have records that are not available to you unless you go to the courthouse. And usually some pretty good analysis of families and Bibles and all sorts of things. Sometimes one of them I'm a member of the Ontario Genealogical Society, and they offer research assistance. They'll look up things for you. They've got databases that you can look at with and without subscription. It's pretty amazing what's on there. I haven't begun to look at everything because there's so much there. And again, they usually have records available to everyone. And then some that if you find that this geographic area is really key to your ancestor, you might want to consider joining. Okay, now the last one that I'm going to talk about today. First of all, are there any questions about what we have, any of the sources, the resources that we've talked about? Let me just look at the chat and see if I can see. I can't do that. If you have a question, you can unmute and ask a question. Okay, well, we will move on then. Now, traveling to the land of your ancestors is magical. It's not necessary. And I understand that it's prohibitive at times. Right now, I can't travel at all. So I'm done with traveling to the land of my ancestors, and I can do a lot just from my laptop, and I'm happy with that. But if you have the opportunity to travel to where your ancestors lived, there is something very special about that. It gives you a feel for where they lived and what their lives were like in a way that is hard to do any other way. So I'm going to take you through a couple of my journeys to the land of my ancestors. So this is a picture of me. I'm on the right, and my daughter is next to me, my daughter Chelsea, and then a young man who she was interested in is next to her, Louis Cooper. She met Louis Cooper online in a day when that was still pretty sketchy to me. And I was worried, is he an axe murderer? Louis is a very fine young man. He lived in Manchester, England. Manchester, England is not very far from Stansfield, England. As I did more research, I found that Stansfield actually isn't even a town, it's a neighborhood in a town called Todmorden, England. And Louis probably lived 20 minutes away from there. So my daughter Chelsea has met this young man online, and they're exchanging, they're mailing cassette tapes to each other as they talk to each other. That was the technology back then. Rather than an expensive phone call, they created tapes and talked that way. She she's as motivated as she was. She heard of a food drive at Dulles Airport. If you brought a certain amount of canned goods to Dulles Airport, you could have your name entered into a drawing to win 2 round trip tickets to London, first class tickets. So she took a bunch of canned goods all on her own to Dulles Airport, turned them in, put her name in, and she won the tickets. She was 18 at the time. So, and they didn't allow her to travel with anyone. She had to travel with someone who was older than 21, which that was me. So she asked me if I would go with her to England. I said yes. And we went to England together. But before we went, we were very excited. We started to make preparations. Before we left, I received a letter from a cousin I'd never met before, and I still haven't met. And he said, I hear you're going to England and you're probably going to do some genealogy. This letter might be of interest to you. Great. So the letter was from Sarah Stell. This is William's daughter, Sarah. And this is a letter that she wrote to her brother, James William, who's my great-grandfather. And James William was kind of a wild guy. And he ran away from home when he was 15 or 16 and became a buffalo hunter. And has some notoriety, good and bad. He was at Adobe Walls, the Battle of Adobe Walls. He went to Texas and met another James William Stell. And that prompted him to write to his sister, Sarah, who's back home in Chicago, to say, hey, what do you know of our ancestry? Because I ran into this James William Stell. Do you think we're related? And so this kind of wild and crazy guy all of a sudden has this interest in genealogy because he wants to know if he has this connection to another person with his same name. The letter that I don't have the letter that he sent to her, to Sarah. I have the letter that Sarah wrote to him. And here's the letter. Brother James, I received your letter in regards to the Stell family. I don't think I can say much. I don't know anything about them. In the first place, and then she proceeds to tell what she knows. In the first place, our father was born in Stansfield, England, November 14, 1824. Came to US when about 21 years old. His father and mother never, and I can't read that, but never left. He had one brother who remained in Todmorden, England. And that brother, he had one son, James Stell. He was a dentist and lived there. I think he is dead. He had 2 or 3 sons. One of the sons, I think, will be about 40 years old. They were all living in or near Todmorden, England, the last I knew anything about them. Now, this is all I know about the Stells. Aunt Olive Mills and Uncle John Stell, and let's see, and our father were the only ones that came. I don't think this James W. Stell you write about is any relation to us. As for John Stell, now John is William's older brother. As for John Stell knowing about any of the family, why, he don't know the ones in Chicago. As for Charles C. Stell, I haven't seen him in 8 years. So this is a really close family. This is my heritage, folks. Okay. Then the kicker, this brother that lived in England, notice she didn't say the father and mother's name, but the brother that lived in England was named Cockcroft Stell. I remain your sister, Sarah. Well, now Cockcroft Stell is a very unusual name. There's only going to be one in the whole country. And when I find him, I will know that I'm related, right? Because I know through this letter that he's William's brother that stayed in England. So I got this maybe a week before, I want to say a couple days before leaving for England. I certainly didn't have time to digest it. I didn't really do anything with it, but I knew I was looking for Cockcroft at this point. So off we go. And after we flew into London, we stayed there for a couple days because you kind of have to see London, right? But I was really anxious to go up north, as was my daughter. So we took the train to Manchester. We rented a car and I started driving on the left-hand side of the road. That was an adventure, especially when I got to the first roundabout. And yes, I did hit the curb once, but that was not bad. So here we are. This is Todmorden. This is where my ancestors lived. And here is me with my daughter, Chelsea, at our bed and breakfast, Cherry Tree Cottage. This building, parts of it are from the 16th century, still standing. And so I know that my ancestor, was there when this house was. So that was pretty cool. Here's the view from the front of Cherry Tree Cottage. And notice the church up on the hill. That is St. Paul's Crossstone, the Church of England church that would have been the center of their lives. Except that Yorkshire was a hotbed of nonconformity, meaning there were a lot of non-Church of England people, which complicated my quest. Because of course, Stells are going to be nonconformists, right? Okay, so what's the first thing I do? Well, I go to the library in Todmorden, and I'm hoping that they have a special local history section there, right? Where there are records that are, you can't find anywhere else. There's going to be a file on the Stell family, right? And there's going to be, no. I got there and I looked and found the same records that I had seen in the good old United States of America. Okay, now what do I do? Well, for lack of anything better to do, we decided, it was a pretty day and I was done at the library. We decided to drive up to that church. So we found our way up there. We got to the cemetery. The church is actually, and this is true of a lot of churches in England now, was actually a private residence now. It had been sold and somebody was living there. And there were some graves that were inside that house, or at least around the house, that we didn't have access to. But it was kind of hard to find the cemetery. We found somebody to direct us to the cemetery. And there was a clear new part of the cemetery, an old part, and obviously we headed to the old. So we go to, there were three of us there, my daughter and me, and my dad was actually there. We go to the middle of we go to the old part of the cemetery, and I'm getting ready to divide and conquer, right? Divide everybody up and tell everybody we're searching for Stells, right? And I look up and I see this. This is the first thing that I see. In memory of Mary, wife of Cockcroft Stell, who died, I think it says January 1st, 1866, age 52 years. And then also, this is where Cockcroft Stell is buried, who died at Stones, February 15th, 1871, age 53 years. Also of Ruth Stansfield, their daughter. Right there in front of me. There it is. Okay. I know that Cockcroft is my second great grandfather's brother, and he's right there. So I'm starting to hunt now. What am I hunting for? I know what, at this point, I know what English marriage certificates look like, and I know that they contain the name of the father. If I can find the name of Cockcroft's father, I will know the name of William's father. And so I know that Todmorden is a registrar's district. I go into the town of Todmorden, and there's this little building that I go into, and I tell a lady I'm looking for a marriage certificate, and she says, okay. She grabs a book from the back, she looks through the pages, and she copies from that book the following. While I'm watching, Cockcroft Stell married Mary Woodhead. This was in 1839. That was really lucky because they didn't start these until 1837. So, yay. Thanks for waiting for 1839, Cockcroft, to get married. On the right-hand side, the father's name and surname is James Stell. Ding, 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 ding. I win. I got it. So, I now know James's parents, don't I? Going back to this original 1841 census record that I saw before, I now know that this is the correct family. I see James Stell, I see Sarah, the mother, I see Elizabeth, I see William. There's Sarah, there's Olive. Remember Aunt Olive Mills from the letter? She's there. Cockcroft is not there because he's already married by 1841. We know that. And there's an older brother, John, who's also already married by this point. And now I have the family. This is the magic of travel. Would I have eventually found? Yeah, I would have eventually found this. But it was pretty fun to walk these steps. Okay, now the story's not done. We're not done with the Todmorden story yet. So 8 years later, in the meantime, I have we've moved from Virginia to Utah. I've gone back to school, and I'm getting my degree in family history. And the last thing I need to do before I graduate is to do an internship. And the internship that I was very fortunate to be able to do is with a professor who took a group of students over to England, and we did research in dozens of archives in England. It was a great experience as a researcher. It was just amazing. You learn your way around an archive at that point. But anyway, 8 years later, oh, and I should mention, we went to London first and did some research at the National Archives for a database that they were putting together of immigrant ancestors. Sometimes if you can't find the immigration records, if you can find emigration records from England, those are more difficult to find. And so going to England, we could go to different libraries and repositories and see if there are any emigration records that could help people figure out where their ancestor came from. So we did that for a few days, and then we took off, still doing research in archives, but it could also, we were governed by the geography of our ancestors. So I took a trip through Cheshire and Lancashire, which is where William's wife Phoebe came from, and then I went to Todmorden again. And so I'm back in Cherry Tree Cottage, and I'm looking at that same church, it's still there. And it is, the main difference is that I'm in a time crunch. I only have 2 days in Todmorden. I used the, and I've got a plane to catch. So I'm going, the next day after my stay in Todmorden, I'm going to the city of York and doing research for 1 day in the Minster there. And then I'm taking the train to London and I'm flying home. So, you know, it's not like I can extend. The first day I'm in Todmorden, I used the day. Oh, the other difference is that I didn't have a car this time. So I'm hoofing it. And the first day I walked to the town of Todmorden and walk the streets where my ancestors lived. So in the various censuses, there are addresses or street names. And so I went to those streets that were still there and still named the same. And I took pictures of houses there that looked like they were old enough to be, you know, to have been standing then. I did a real fun tour of where the Stells lived that I'd gotten from my research. The second day, I had something to do in the morning. So I had an afternoon where I wanted to go back to that cemetery. By this time, I knew that the Stells had been in Todmorden for at least 100 years. And they had married into a lot of the people that were buried there, I was sure. So I was going to go look for more Stell headstones. And I was going to look and see and really get all that I could. I brought my camera. I walked up there. It was, 2 or 3 mile walk. And I get up there and I don't have much time. I've got a couple hours. Here's the cemetery. Wild purple rhododendrons blooming. It's a lovely, lovely spot. But there are storm clouds coming. And I know I have to hurry. I don't think I had an umbrella. I was wearing a raincoat. I did not have an umbrella. So I pull my camera out. As I come into the cemetery, there was an elderly couple there, and I nodded a greeting to them, and then went over to where Cockcroft was, and I started there and then went further. I put my backpack down, I pulled my camera out and got it going, and my memory card was full. I was so mad at myself. It wouldn't have taken anything to download the memory card onto my laptop and be able to take hundreds of pictures. But I didn't have time to walk back to the B&B and then come back. I just didn't have the time. And I was just, you know how you kick yourself. Maybe you're not an idiot like I am, but I was so mad. I'm in England. I can't get back here again. And I still haven't gone back. This is a once in a lifetime. And what have I done? So I'm put out. And I probably slammed my, I didn't curse, but I was not happy. I put my backpack down. I pulled out a notebook and a pen and paper. I thought, well, I'll just write down what I can, but I'm just so mad at myself. I can't stand it. Well, as I'm going through my tantrum, this elderly couple, I think, noticed how agitated I was. And they came over and they said, yeah, what's the problem here? Can we help in any way? And I told them what I'd done. I confessed, yeah, this is really stupid. I just didn't prepare well. And they said, well, I wonder if you'd be interested. We've just finished gathering all the monumental inscriptions. That's what they call the headstone inscriptions. We've got all the monumental inscriptions gathered together. We're here today just finishing up measuring, distances between headstones. But we've got all this information already gathered. Is that something you'd be interested in? And yeah, I think I would. I think I could have stayed there all day or stayed there for the next couple hours and not gotten everything that you've gotten. So at that point, it started to pour. And so we ran off. They said, "You don't have a car." I said, "I don't have a car." They said, "Get in." I got in their car. They drove me to Cherry Tree Cottage and dropped me off. They drove to their house and picked up a couple CDs. They drove back to Cherry Tree Cottage and gave me the CDs. They refused any money or CDs or gas or anything. And I later made a donation because they're from the Calderdale Historical Society. There you go. And as they drove away, you know, I almost expected that car to just disappear. It was that magical. It was that crazy a coincidence. And I had to feel that something was guiding me, that something was helping me in spite of my stupidity, that I ran into this couple on that afternoon who had all of that information for me. So that is the magic of travel. Again, I realize that not everybody can do that. And you can find the information that you need without the travel. But this changed me. If I was, you know, if I was less than enthusiastic about genealogy before this changed me. And so it's been fun to recount this and to think about this and to share with you what travel has done for me. Okay. Any questions? Any stories you'd like to share? Feel free to unmute your mics. And
I never got a chance to travel to Poland. My father did when he was retired, he and my youngest brother. And they located cousins that lived in the same town in where my grandparents lived, or born, excuse me, my grandfather was born. And they still had on their property an old log cabin. It was tiny. It was maybe like 10 by 12. They used as kind of a garage, you know, tool stuff in there. That was the home that my grandparents made.
wow.
Awesome.
Probably
Yeah.
hand hewn logs, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Awesome. It was awesome.
You might have a picture or two of that, right?
That's what I was inquiring about. Acquiring my youngest brother was there with him. I said, tell me you've taken some pictures of that. You know,
Yeah.
you have them in your records. I'd like to see it.
Yeah. Very cool.
You know, one other source, when you go to, if you traveled some of the towns, is going to a local library. Some of those local libraries may have information. I found a church record book that covered 7 years back in the 1850s in Pulaski, Virginia, that happened to mention an ancestor of mine in there and some of his family members. So little libraries just might have something.
Yeah.
When you're looking.
Yeah, always check. Always check.
I traveled to the Netherlands, and the first time I didn't find the house. The address had changed. The second time I went, I did find the house, went to the archive there, and the archivist researched the house of who had owned the house previously up to when my great-great-grandfather left in 1869. And a cousin also visited and talked to the son of the person who owned the house at the time. And the story had come down about the people who had sold the house and left and gone to the US in 1869.
Wow. That's just,
Susan, I'd like to share with the group something that happened to me. It's not a case of traveling to visit where your ancestors came from. This is a story about having been there and not known anything about it. I was married quite young, and my husband at the time was training to fly helicopters to fight in the Vietnam War. And the main base for that was in Alabama, Fort Rucker, Alabama, outside of Enterprise and Dothan. And
Well, just you go on Family Search and I think go to the wiki, and you can find them that way. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but
okay.
there's many just focused on geography.
Okay.
You know, very, very helpful.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe next week, could you show us maybe next week how to
Sure.
how to use that resource? Because I'm not familiar with that. That would be
Okay.
wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? So next week, we're going to talk about genealogical proof standards. It should help you to analyze each of your connections to see if they're really proven. And we're also going to talk about a few advanced research strategies, what to do when there appears to be no hope, when you're up against the brick wall. So we'll talk again next week.
Susan,
Yeah.
this is Connie. One of the difficulties that I just keep, banging into, and it's a common complaint, but finding women, finding women's records because of their married name, their maiden name,
Right.
or sometimes because of the way the archaic laws were, they didn't own property. There's just all these challenges around finding women.
Mhm.
Would there be time to give some insights into that?
Sure. I'd be happy to do a section on finding women. That's a great suggestion. I'll
Thank
do that.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, barring further comment, we will see you all next